So we're going to pick up with 2.5, which is called The Jackal. And so this chapter picks up right where 2.4 left off. So 2.4, just to recap, is the chapter where Charles Darnay and Sidney Carton go out to eat, or drink, I should say, after the case is acquitted. Darnay is acquitted. And we see a very different side of Sidney Carton, where he's very, very rude to Charles Darnay. He seems really unlikable. And he passes out and falls asleep. But we also see kind of a different side of him where he talks about, I wish that I had been looked at by those blue eyes. So he's definitely a little bit more complicated as a character, or more dynamic as a character than we maybe originally thought. So then chapter 5 is called The Jackal. So a jackal is like a dog, sort of. I always think about it because I have kids, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen The Lion King. Think of it like a hyena, right? So where the lion is kind of like considered the king of the jungle, the hyena does the lion's dirty work, right? But is a lesser, kind of like a lesser animal, lesser on the food chain. So just kind of think about that metaphor as we get into this chapter. And I am going to skip around in this chapter a little bit because Charles Dickens gets a little wordy, extra wordy in this chapter. So I'm just going to skip a little bit. So I'll let you know where I am so that you know where to read. Okay, so on page 82, it says, "Those were drinking days, and most men drank hard. So very great is the improvement time has brought about in such habits, that a moderate statement of the quantity of wine and punch which one man would swallow in the course of a night, without any detriment to his reputation as a perfect gentleman, would seem, in these days, a ridiculous exaggeration. The learned profession of the law was certainly not behind other learned professions in its bacchanalian propensities. Neither was Mr. Stryver, already fast shouldering his way to a large and lucrative practice, behind his compeers in particular, any more than in the drier parts of the legal race." So this is speaking to Stryver's character again. We talked about names with Charles Dickens, and he's not beating around the bush with Stryver, right? So Stryver, literally just spelled differently, strives to be the best. He wants to be first in line. And so it always talks about him shouldering his way up. So just a little bit more about him. It says that a favorite at the Old Bailey and eke at the sessions, Mr. Stryver had begun cautiously to hew away the lower staves of the ladder on which he mounted. Sessions and Old Bailey had now to summon their favorite, specially to their longing arms, and shouldering itself toward the visage of the Lord Chief Justice in the Court of King's Bench, the florid countenance of Mr. Stryver might be daily seen, bursting out of the bed of wigs like a great sunflower pushing its way at the sun from a rank garden full of flaring companions. So think about the weather, like nature reference there. It had once been noted at the bar that while Mr. Stryver was a glib man, and an unscrupulous, and a ready, and a bold, he had not that faculty of extracting the essence from a heap of statements, which is among the most striking and necessary of the advocate's accomplishments. But a remarkable improvement came upon him as to this. The more business he got, the greater his power seemed to grow of getting at its pith and marrow. And however late at night he sat carousing with Sidney Carton, he always had his points at his fingers in the morning. So Sidney Carton, idlest and most uncompromising of men, was Stryver's great ally. What the two drank together between Hilary Term and Michaelmas might have floated a kingship, so they drink a lot. Stryver never had a case in hand anywhere, but Carton was there, with his hands in his pockets, staring at the ceiling of the court. So this suggests that a huge part of Stryver's success and accomplishments go back to Carton, right? Go back to this guy who's always there, who seems to not be paying attention, but who is, and who comes in at these like clutch moments. At last it began to get about among such as were interested in the matter that although Sidney Carton would never be a lion, he was an amazingly good jackal, and that he rendered suit and service to Stryver in that humble capacity. Something just fell in my room. So if Sidney Carton is the jackal, he does all the dirty work, he does all of Stryver's, like, the annoying stuff, the paperwork, he comes in at these clutch moments. Stryver is the lion, he gets the credit, but without the jackal, the lion wouldn't be who he is. So that's really important. So just flipping the page to 84. So this is back at the bar where Carton was passed out on the table. So 10 o'clock, sir, said the man at the tavern, whom he had charged to wake him. 10 o'clock, sir. What's the matter? 10 o'clock, sir. What do you mean? 10 o'clock at night? Yes, sir. Your honor told me to call you. Oh, I remember very well. So, like, the waiter wakes him up. After a few dull efforts to get to sleep again, which the man dexterously combated by stirring the fire continuously for 5 minutes, he got up, tossed his hat on, and walked out. He turned into the temple, and having revived himself by twice pacing the pavements of the King's Bench, Walk, and Paper buildings, turned into Stryver's chambers. I'm jumping down just a couple paragraphs. So he gets to Stryver's house. It says, they went into a dingy room lined with books and littered with papers, where there was a blazing fire. A kettle steamed upon the hob, and in the midst of the wreck of papers, a table shone, with plenty of wine upon it, and brandy and rum and sugar and lemons. You have had your bottle, I perceive, Sidney. 2 tonight, I think. I have been dining with the day's client, or seeing him dine. It's all one. That was a rare point, Sidney, that you brought to bear upon the identification. How did you come by it? When did it strike you? So, like, whoa, you really came in big with this, the point about Carton and Darnay looking alike. How'd you figure it out? I thought he was a rather handsome fellow, and I thought that I should have been much the same sort of fellow if I'd had any luck. Mr. Stryver laughed till he shook his precocious paunch. You and your luck, Sidney. Get to work, get to work. Sullenly enough, the jackal loosened his dress, went into an adjoining room, and came back with a large jug of cold water, a basin, and a towel or two. Steeping the towels in the water, and partially wringing them out, he folded them on his head in a manner hideous to behold, and sat down at the table and said, now I'm ready. So he's trying to sober himself up. So think about the fact that, like, normally at 10 o'clock, we would be thinking about going to bed or already be in bed. He's thinking about, like, starting his work. So he's nocturnal. He's the opposite of the rest of us, right? So that's another difference with him. Not much boiling down to be done tonight, Memory, said Mr. Stryver gaily as he looked among his papers. How much? Only 2 sets of them. Give me the worst first. There they are, Sidney. Fire away. So pay attention to this. It says, the lion then composed himself on his back on a sofa on one side of the drinking table, while the jackal sat at his own paper-bestrewn table proper on the other side of it. So Carton's sitting at a table littered with papers that he's going to read through and do whatever he's going to do. And then Stryver is sitting back with his feet up on the couch, like relaxing with a drink. So that says something right there in terms of, like, their work ethics and who's the real, like, brains behind the operation. So this continues, so I'm just going to jump down to the next paragraph. So it says, at length, the jackal had got together a compact repast for the lion and proceeded to offer it to him, so he gets him a drink. The lion took it with care and caution, made his selection from it and his remarks upon it, and the jackal assisted both. When the repast was fully discussed, the lion put his hands in his waistband again and lay down to meditate. The jackal then invigorated himself with a bumper for his throttle and a fresh application to the head, and applied himself to the collection of a second meal. This was administered to the lion in the same manner, and was not disposed of until the clock struck 3 in the morning. So they, aka Carton, works till 3. And now we have done, Sidney. Fill our bumper of punch, said Mr. Stryver. The jackal removed the towels from his head, which had been steamed again, shook himself, yawned, shivered, and complied. You were very sound, Sidney, in the matter of those crown witnesses today. Every question told. I am always sound, am I not? I don't gainsay it. What has roughened your temper? Put some punch to it and smooth it again. With a depreciatory grunt, the jackal again complied. The old Sidney Carton of old Shrewsbury School, said Stryver, nodding his head over at him as he reviewed him in the present and the past. The old seesaw Sidney, up 1 minute, down the next, now in spirits, now in despondency. So Stryver and Carton have known each other for a really long time. They were in school together. So they imagine, like, they were in high school together, then they went to college together, then they went to law school together, and now they work together. So they've spent a lot of time together. And basically the point that Stryver's making is that Carton has always kind of had this, like, up and down personality, up 1 minute, down the next. Returned the other, sighing. Yes, the same Sydney with the same luck. Even then, I did exercises for other boys and seldom did my own. So that would be like you doing other people's homework, but not your own. So you get in trouble when you come into English because you don't have your homework, but you've done other people in the class's homework. It makes no sense. And why not? God knows it was my way, I suppose. He sat with his hands in his pockets and his legs stretched out before him, looking at the fire. Carton, said his friend, squaring himself at him with a bullying air, as if the fire grate had been the furnace in which sustained endeavor was forged, and the one delicate thing to be done for the old Sidney Carton of old Shrewsbury School was to shoulder him into it. Your way is, and always was, a lame way. You summon no energy and purpose. Look at me. Oh, botheration, returned Sidney with a lighter and more good-humored laugh. Don't you be moral. How have I done what I've done, said Stryver. How do I do what I do? Partly through paying me to help you, I suppose, but it's not worth your while to apostrophize me or the air about it. What you want to do, you do. You were always in the front rank, and I was always behind. I had to get in the front rank. I was not born there, was I? I was not present at the ceremony, but my opinion is that you were, said Carton. At this, he laughed again, and they both laughed. My lights go off automatically. Before Shrewsbury, and at Shrewsbury, and ever since Shrewsbury, pursued Carton, you have fallen into your rank, and I have fallen into mine. Even when we were fellow students in the student quarter of Paris, picking up French and French law and other French crumbs that we didn't get much good of, you were always somewhere, and I was always nowhere. So again, that's really telling in terms of like how Carton thinks about himself. And whose fault was that? Upon my soul, I'm not sure that it was not yours. You were always driving and riving and shouldering and pressing to that restless degree that I had no chance of my life but in rest and repose. It's a gloomy thing, however, to talk about one's past with the day breaking. Turn me in some other direction before I go. Well then, pledge me to the pretty witness, said Stryver, holding up his glass. So this is the second time in one night that Carton has toasted to Lucy Manette, except now it's Stryver bringing her up. You turned in a pleasant direction. Apparently not, for he became gloomy again. Pretty witness, he muttered, looking down at his glass. I've had enough of witnesses today and tonight. Who's your pretty witness? The picturesque doctor's daughter, Miss Manette. She pretty? Is she not? No, why, man alive, she was the admiration of the whole court. Rot the admiration of the whole court. Who made the Old Bailey a judge of beauty? She was a golden-haired doll. Do you know, Sidney, said Mr. Stryver, looking at him with sharp eyes and slowly dragging a hand across his florid face, do you know, I rather thought at the time that you sympathized with the golden-haired doll and that you were quick to see what happened to the golden-haired doll? So what's happening here is they're kind of like ribbing each other. So Carton tries to pretend like he doesn't think Lucy's pretty. We know that that's probably not true. He calls her a golden-haired doll, which is not a compliment. Think about why, right? Like, so if somebody calls you a doll, dolls are not alive. They have no depth to them. So yeah, she's pretty. She has the golden hair, but then that's it. And that's kind of true about Lucy, right? So he's kind of right, but although I don't think he really believes it. And then so Stryver is making fun of him, being like, hey, it seems like you really paid attention to that golden hair doll. Quick to see what happened if a girl, doll or no doll, swoons or almost faints. Within a yard or two of a man's nose, he can see it without a perspective glass. I pledge you, but I deny the beauty. And now I'll have no more drink. I'll get to bed. When his host followed him out on the staircase with a candle to light him down the stairs, the day was coldly looking in through its grimy windows. When he got out of the house, the air was cold and sad. So think about the air is cold and sad. Think about the mood and the tone of that. The dull sky overcast, the river dark and dim, the whole scene like a lifeless desert, and wreaths of dust were spinning round and round before the morning blast, as if the desert sand had risen far away, and the first spray of it, in its advance, had begun to overwhelm the city. Waste forces within him, and a desert all around, this man stood on his way across a silent terrace, and saw for a moment, lying in the wilderness before him, a mirage of honorable ambition, self-denial, and perseverance. So he's walking home, he sees a mirage, think about what a mirage is. You're in the desert. You see this vision of an oasis ahead of you, something that's not really there. It's an illusion. So appearance versus reality. I can't breathe. In the fair city of this vision, there were airy galleries from which the loves and graces looked upon him, gardens in which the fruits of life hung ripening, waters of hope that sparkled in his sight. A moment, and it was gone. Climbing into a high chamber in a well of houses, he threw himself down in his chamber. He threw himself down in his clothes on a neglected bed, and its pillow was wet with wasted tears. So he cries himself to sleep. So the guy who seems to not care, is looking at the ceiling, seems uninvolved, is a real jerk to Charles Darnay, is kind of a jerk to Mr. Lorry, is a jerk to a lot of people, right? Cares a lot more than he lets on. So then it says, sadly, sadly, the sun rose. It rose upon no sadder sight than the man of good abilities and good emotions, incapable of their directed exercise, incapable of his own help and its own happiness, sensible of the blight on him and resigning himself to let it eat him away. So he goes to bed, the sun is rising, back to the whole, like, he's nocturnal thing. It's opposite of the rest of us. He's really living this, like, opposite life. And that's it.